Hi, and welcome to another FND presentation. Today, we're continuing along with our It's a Great I.D.E.A series, the right of students with disabilities to an individualized education plan, or the IEP. So welcome. I'm glad that you're here today. My name is Sassafras Middleman. I am a parent trainer here at the Family Network on Disabilities. We are a nonprofit, a 501c3. We do not work with your local school districts or with the State Department of Education. Instead, we actually get a grant under Part D of the I.D.E.A to be the state's parent training and information center. We are family driven and family centered, and we were founded in 1985 when a group of parents came together looking for resources and supports for their kids. And out of that, we have grown. We now have the largest national shared pool trust for individuals with disabilities, and we have the Parent Training and Information Center contract for the state of Florida. We do not act as attorneys, doctors, or mental health professionals, but instead we get you information, resources, supports, super up to date, very vetted directly from the law or the agencies that they relate to. And we make sure that you understand that information. We know that you're not special educators out there. We know you're not lawyers. We know that you need a little supports, and that's what we're here for. We are here to help you along with that process. All right, so we are talking about the I.D.E.A, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which of course is our national federal education law. Um, so this is the special education law of the land. None of the state legislations can come up with anything that would supersede it. None of the local school districts nor schools within them can come up with any policies that would be not in compliance with the I.D.E.A. So we have this beautiful law that thinks about all of the timelines, procedures, policies, provides the oversight, even provides the funding for organizations like ours so that parents have a place to go. And then it also, of course, it provides the funding and direct oversight of the states to make sure that it is working within the provisions of the I.D.E.A. So we're just going to review quickly the 6 major principles or tenets of the I.D.E.A. That's what the series is all about. So in our first presentation, we did a brief overview, and then we covered number 1, a free and appropriate public education. Then we talked about number 2, appropriate evaluations. And in today's breakout topic, we're going to be talking about the individualized education plan and the process and how we can better participate and understand as parents. The 4th major tenet, which will be our next portion in our series, will be the least restrictive environment, which of course speaks to the inclusion. Inclusion is best, and I.D.E.A agrees, and that is the law of the land. And number 5, that parent participation is critical, that we are a very important role at the education in the education of our children. We deserve that spot at the IEP table. We deserve the right to request evaluations. We deserve the right to prior written notice, to notifications of how the goals are going, what services are being provided. We are very important parts of the team. And of course, number 6, procedural safeguards, which are our alternative dispute resolutions, which I know a lot of parents that are interested in about and not really sure how they work. So I'm really looking forward to getting into that at the end of our series. So moving into our topic for today, we're talking about the IEP, or that Individualized Education Plan. So an IEP is a written plan that tells you, the child, the teachers, and the school staff which ESE services the school are required to provide to your child. It is not a guide. It is actually a contract. It is binding under the law of the I.D.E.A. Once these goals have been written based on proper evaluations and the identifications of needs and strengths, then we absolutely have a responsibility within the school system to meet these children's unique educational needs. So every child who has a disability and who is eligible for ESE will have an IEP. And that, of course, is that individualized education plan, very much tailored to your student. So the IEPs are developed during IEP meetings. So you will get, again, prior written notice. We're going to keep talking about that because that is one of the big rights that we have as parents. You will get a written notice from the school before each IEP meeting. That notice will tell you the day, the time, the place that's suggested for that meeting, the form, whether it's going to be a teleconference call, virtual, or in person. And I will tell you, as the parent, it is your right to decide which of those forms best suits, your schedule, your needs, your life. It has to tell you who will be there and why the meeting is being held. Never go into a meeting not knowing what that meeting is about. As parents, we need to be on the same page so that we can constructively brainstorm in real time. We need to walk into that meeting with an understanding of what's going to be discussed and with our own contributions already planned out. So the school staff will help in writing the IEP. So they're going to find a day, a time, and a place that's good for you. You can, again, choose whether that's going to be virtual or in person. If they have picked one and it's not the one that works for you, it is written into the very law, into I.D.E.A, that us parents get to decide and that they have to make every reasonable accommodation to meet our needs so that we do not have to waive our right to parental participation. So if you choose not to participate in the meeting, the school can hold that IEP meeting without you. Even if you choose not to participate, you will still receive a copy of that IEP. I would encourage you to always, always, always participate in those meetings. We bring invaluable insight, and it's critical that we know what the plan for our child is. So here are some things to keep in mind about the IEP. It's just for your child only. There's only one IEP at a time. The IEP is going to describe the services your child will receive from the beginning date to the end date of that IEP, which has to be for 1 year or less. A new IEP has to be written at least once annually. However, if they have met their goals, if there's been some new behaviors that have popped up that are clearly related to their disability, do you wait till the end of the school year? No, this just means that that schools have to at least once annually revisit and rewrite the IEP. But that doesn't mean that it has to wait if something comes up until the next IEP date, which is typically at the end of the school year. So if your child has met their goals, or like I said, there's new behaviors or there's new considerations, maybe they regressed and stopped speaking, then we need communication goals. That needs to be identified. Maybe they've been really frustrated and they've been lashing out a little bit. That needs to be documented on the IEP. We need it to be at all times the most accurate picture of that kiddo so that we know what services are needed, what goals are needed to help that child to thrive in the educational environment. So the people that you and your school invite to the IEP meeting should have knowledge or expertise on your child or the technology or any evaluations that were done on your child. If you're going to invite somebody, that is absolutely right. When you get that invitation form for the meeting, you're going to write on there who you're bringing. It is also your right to have that meeting and all of the paperwork in your native language. Make sure that you understand. Informed consent also plays into that. If it's written in your native language, but it's reading like French, you need to stop whatever is happening and say, I need to be explained what this is. I don't know what that acronym means. I don't know what's going on with that. I don't, I can't consent to something. I don't know what it is. Okay. So when you sign the IEP, it doesn't mean that you're in agreement. In fact, you can actually sign right next to your signature that I am not in agreement with this document. Or you can write, did not have enough time to address all parental concerns, requesting a follow-up meeting. Okay, so just know that that IEP is not necessarily the end of the discussion. There can be another IEP. And then, failing that or refusal to have a follow-up meeting, you have your procedural safeguards, which we just mentioned rather, is one of your 6 tenets of the IDEA. And we will be getting into that. So you'll have better understanding of that too. Um, it your signature does not mean that you're giving permission for your services to begin. You're going to be given to give requested to give another signature saying that you give permission for the services to begin for your child. So again, the IEP table is a brainstorming session. Um, Always request a copy of your IEP in advance, families. Okay. We've all gone to the IEP meetings where it's basically just being read to us, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of area for brainstorming or parental contribution, because it's already written and they need that 45 minutes to read it to you and get your signature. Well, what if you requested it a week in advance, right? And you compared it and contrasted it to the last year's IEP? Did the goals change? Is it actually covering everything that has changed and that either growth, regression, new exhibitions of the disability? Does the IEP reflect all of that? Make your points that you want to come to the table with, your brainstorming topics, because there's not so much need to read the document to you because you've already read the document and you know what they're going to suggest. And now you can use that meeting as a vehicle to have your own voice heard, which is the true nature of what that meeting is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a collaborative brainstorming session. Now, of course, they had to already have started, so you have to have something that you're starting with, a baseline, but we're supposed to be able to be revising and adding to that IEP in real time at that IEP meeting. So now we're going to look at the IEP document itself. It has 9 components, and it can also include some additional information depending on the individual needs of the student. So this is the flow of our IEP. The first part is the present levels of academic and functional performance. So this is where it's going to describe, any evaluations that were done, their test results, how they're doing in classroom observations. It can also show parental concerns and issues. It's speaking to where they are. And notice it said and functional performing. It's not just the obligations of the school is not just to get our kids academically prepared for the future. They are to get them prepared for the future. So if your child has a language delay, if your child is having behavioral issues, if your child needs help with independent functioning, again, the zipping, the buttoning, the self-feeding, all of that needs to be identified in that first section. If the child has communication needs, if they need socialization needs, all of that needs to be identified in that first section, because then when we go to the second section, we know what to write our goals on because we have the most accurate and up-to-date portrayal of that kiddo. So then we write goals. And then number 3, we have our benchmarks or our short-term goals. So these are our annual goals broken down into how long the intervals that we're going to teach the different components to reach the annual goal, and then how we're going to teach that annual goal. 4 is how progress will be measured and reported to parents. In the state of Florida, it's generally included with the report card that comes out. Number 5, the ESC services. So whether they are in, mainstream, whether they are getting pull-out services, whether they're getting the assistance of a related service, again, occupational therapy, physical therapy, behaviorist, reading specialist, all of that. Of course, supplementary aids and services, one-on-ones or paras in the classroom. Number 6, accommodations and modifications. Number 7, accommodations in the administration of state and district-wide assessments. Did you see how those are different sections? 6 is accommodations. And 7 is accommodations in statewide standardized testing. And I'm bringing this up as a side note because I try to talk about all the little caveats where us parents kind of fall and don't realize in the little cracks, right? So your child has some wonderful accommodations, longer testing time, quieter environment. Maybe they're able to even orally give answers because they are fine motor or motor or challenged. Um, and they have those accommodations for classwork under number 6. Does that automatically mean, even if they have it for testing in the general classroom under number 6, does that carry over to standardized testing? No, no, it does not. So number 7 needs to have the same accommodations that number 6 does, but for standardized testing. Okay. If you need more help with that, give us a call, okay? These webinars are to whet your interest. If you need more information, we have it, okay? So give us a call and we will help further demystify all that. Number 8 is the Florida alternate assessment, and that is, whether the decision is made, whether they will participate in the standardized assessments that every kiddo in the state of Florida is taking, or whether they're going to take that alternative assessment for students with disabilities. And number 9, see, number 1 and number 9 are the most important ones because after we've looked at and identified the needs of the child, we've made annual goals. We've broken those down into benchmarks or short-term goals. We've identified how we're going to track progress and let the parents know. We've identified what services that we need to support all of those goals, what accommodations and modifications, making sure those same accommodations and modifications appear on the state tests. After all of that, we decide placement. Where is the best place for this kiddo to receive all of these services to meet their goals and needs? So the present levels of academic and functional performance. I always go on way too long in these webinars and in-person presentations because I cannot stress to you enough. If it doesn't say that your child is struggling with this issue in the first part of the IEP, then your child does not have that issue, according to the school, according to I.D.E.A, according to everybody. They simply don't have that need. So if you're looking at your child's IEP, you got it a week in advance, and you're noticing there's no communication mention at all, and my child's nonverbal. Why are we not addressing their communication needs, right? Address those needs. Again, behaviors. Kids that have behaviors that are attributable to their disability have protections under the I.D.E.A. We don't want kids not being able to participate on field trips and class outings, and we want kids to be properly disciplined under the knowledge that this is going to work for them and it's not just punishing them for an expression of their disability. So that kind of stuff is very, very important. If your child is struggling to self-feed themselves, to zip their clothes, toileting, whatever, make sure that that is mentioned on there. Anything that is going to, encumber your child or create a need in the educational environment is something that we need to address on that first part. Because if we don't, your child doesn't have that. And I'll give you an example. We have 3 kids with autism, right? One kid's doing great academically. He has an IEP because he's got some social quirks and they've got some goals on that. And they've got some communication goals, but he doesn't have a lot of academic needs. He doesn't have a lot of behavioral needs. Then we have another child who's, nonverbal, is eloping, is biting themselves. They're going to have totally different expressions of the same disability, right? The same could be said of many, many, many disabilities. That's why it's an individualized education plan, because not every kid with cerebral palsy has the same symptoms. Not every kid with autism has the same symptoms. Not every kid with Down syndrome has the same symptoms. This is your chance to say, little Johnny has this. That's what little Johnny's autism looks like. Okay. Miss Shanika, she has this need and this need and this need. And that's how Miss Shanika's Down syndrome presents. And we are individualizing this. I can't stress that enough. If it's not in that first section of the IEP, your child does not have that need or that struggle. Okay, it's as simple as that. There's no obligation to write goals toward it. There's no obligation to provide assistive technology for it. There's no, if it's not listed on the IEP, there's no IDEA protection for it because your kid essentially does not have that need. Okay, if you need more training on the IEP, on how to participate, more understanding on the flow, please give us a call and we will help with that. So, measurable annual goals. So, these are the big goals that we make for the whole school year, the duration of the IEP, and they are directly based on the things that we have identified, the needs and the strengths that are on the PLEAP, or the present levels of educational and functional performance. Excuse me. So, here's just some examples of some annual goals. By the end of the school year, John will independently read a fourth grade textbook and answer comprehension questions with 80% accuracy. By the end of the school year, Mary will use words instead of hitting when she is angry, upset, or needs help 80% of the time. By the end of the year, through participating in a keyboarding class, Eric will be able to use a laptop to complete and turn in 95% of his homework assignments on time. Okay. And then as kids get older, at the age of 12, we start looking at transitional goals and transitional IEPs. Well, they'll also have goals that relate to what their life is going to look like after high school graduation. So these are our annual goals. They're big goals based on the needs identified in the present levels of educational and functional performance. So our benchmarks and short-term objectives, this is, how we're going to go about achieving it. So benchmarks and short-term objectives, really are only required for students who take the Florida alternative assessments. For other students, they're optional. However, the IEP team makes the decisions about that. However, I will warn you, if your annual goals are not good, then you need objectives. So let me go back to that previous slide. So we're dreaming big, we're setting goals, we're taking action, right? That's what we're doing here. So by the end of the year, Johnny will read with a fourth grade textbook and answer comprehension questions with 80% accuracy. See, that's a good goal because it's smart, it's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timeable. If your annual goal is Johnny will learn to read, then you better have some benchmarks and short-term objectives saying how we're going to get this kid reading. So a short-term objective based on that would be, by the end of the first semester, Johnny will recognize the letters A through Z. By the end of the second semester, Johnny will identify and blend the phonemes for the letters A through Z. Do you see how we're breaking that big goal down into smaller goals? And by the way, we never want a goal that just says Johnny will learn to read. It's not specific. It's not measurable. It may or may not be attainable. Is it realistic? It's certainly not timeable. So we want to have SMART goals. So how your child's progress will be measured and reported. Throughout the year, you and the school are going to be keeping track of how it's going, how, are they meeting the goals, what kind of progress is being made. You are going to get those progress notes that come along with the report cards that are specifically speaking to their progress on those annual and short-term benchmark goals. So ESE services, related services, supplementary aids and services, and supports for personnel, quite a mouthful. So the IEP describes each ESC or exceptional student education service that that child is going to be receiving. It describes every accommodation, modification, support, supplementary aids, the use of assistive technology, all of that are going to be written into the IEP. So know that inclusion, we want that child, inclusion is the heart of IDEA, and we want that child as close to the mainstream and mainstream regular ed educational classroom as possible. And so we have all of these other services and supplemental aids and personnel supports because we want to keep kids learning as close to their typical non-disabled peers as possible. However, they are eligible. Every child served by ESE are allowed to have these services. So I don't want to make it sound like it's just for regular ed. Every child served under exceptional student education services has a right to assistive technology, supportive personnel, related services. All of that is something that's eligible by virtue of eligibility into the ESE program under the IDEA. Accommodations and modifications. So sometimes parents can get a little mixed up about what the differences are between these. So accommodations are changes to the way that the student accesses the curriculum and instructions and demonstrates what they know. They have to know the exact same thing that every other kid in the class has to know. So let me give you an example of an accommodation, right? I used to be a teacher, and so we're all reading this passage of the book, and we're answering questions about setting and main character, and who's the antagonist, who's the protagonist. And most of the kids are writing down their answers, and that's fine. I have two kids that I call to my desk and I ask them the answers, and they are allowed to orally give me the answers because one of them has cerebral palsy and she can't use her hands at all. And the other one has, autism and has poor hand strength and writes very illegibly, but can read and knows who the character, the setting, and the protagonist is. So you see what I'm saying? All the kids are answering the same questions. I'm teaching every kid in that room the same lesson, and every kid has to show the same comprehension level. That can be achieved all kinds of ways, right? We can give them more time. We can give them a flexible environment. We can change, the lighting in the classroom. We can change the noise level in the classroom. We can give them technology that, instead of them coming and sitting, and these were younger guys, they did just come and report to me and that worked. But, as they're getting older, they would probably do well with some assistive technology that would allow them to do text voice to text, and then they could just print off their responses and turn them in just like every other kid, because it doesn't matter if you wrote them or you typed them up through this program, because that's not what we're testing. We're testing for understanding of setting and character and all of that stuff, right? So we can give longer time, we can give preferential seating, we can change how they give their responses. They have to learn the exact same content and be able to demonstrate that they have learned that content. Now, modifications are where we're actually changing what that student is expected to learn. Generally, modifications are only used in students who have cognitive impairment or severe um, cognitive impairment. So we're talking about IQ of 67 or lower. That's generally when we're talking about modifications. So usually that aligns with access points, which are a separate set of benchmarks that align with the same Sunshine State standards that all students learn, but there's a little bit less breadth and depth in each lesson. So we actually are changing how much that we're teaching those students and how much we expect them to give us back as well. So this is again, I feel like I really covered this before, accommodations in the administration of state and district-wide assessments. So remember going back to our sections of the IEP, number 6 was accommodations and modifications, right? But number 7 was a whole nother box, accommodations and modifications in the administration of test and district-wide assessments. Make sure the two align, okay? If you have the accommodations in section 6, make sure that they're there on the set in section 7. I know you're probably like, why wouldn't there be? I mean, obviously, just trust me, get the IEP in advance. Make sure that they have those accommodations. Make sure that they're the same accommodations in 6 and 7. Now, know that there are some accommodations and modifications that actually can't be made with standardized testing, but there are quite a few that can be. So just don't assume that if you have them for classwork and class-wide and classroom assessments, don't assume that it's carrying over to the district and statewide assessments. So some examples though, since we're talking about testing accommodations, an interpreter uses sign language to give directions to a test to a child that can't hear. A child takes a 3-hour test in 3 separate 1-hour sessions rather than one long session, because those are long sections. Let me tell you, I have had to proctor those and it's hard. I have ADHD and as when the teacher, I'm like ready to just crawl out of my skin because nobody can talk and nobody can look around and nobody can walk. And it's inhibitive for children in general, but especially children that need to wiggle and need to move and just need breaks because they get frustrated. Um, so another example would be a child responds to test questions orally rather than the way the other students do. Or again, with the use of, a text to voice or voice to text program. So those are some different accommodations that can be done with those statewide and district-wide assessments. So the Florida Alternative Assessment, this is the assessment that is done with students with disabilities who require direct intensive instruction and skills needed for community living, leisure, and vocational activities. And most kids do take the standardized assessments, but one of the accommodations that can be made is that their passing grade not be based on that. So something to know. That was what we did with my daughter, that she did take the standardized assessments rather, and we did have the accommodations where they would break them up because if they asked her to sit still for 3 hours, they would in no way get an accurate picture of her, academic skills. But we also had it just because she just wasn't a good test taker that, she did take it, but that was not a requirement for her passing on to the next grade level. So placement and the least restrictive environment, or LRE. So we're going to talk about this a lot. That's actually going to be our next breakout topic. And as you might remember, it is one of the 6 tenets of the IDEA, and we're going to be talking about that quite a bit. The IDEA speaks to inclusion, and we've been talking about this whole series that we want kids to have as much access to non-disabled peers as possible. And if not in the regular education classroom all day, through pep rallies, school events, sports, time in special areas, the playground, the cafeteria, inclusion is the answer. So for a state to receive federal funds, the state's plan has to include a promise that a child with disability will only be removed from regular education classrooms if the nature or severity of their disability interferes to such a degree that education, even with the use of supports and related services and additional personnel and assistive technology, cannot satisfactorily achieve their education within that mainstream classroom. So, the Florida statutes have language that have come out that is very similar. It mirrors IDEA, and so inclusion is just where we're going in education. So, again, that's one of our tenets. We will really be breaking that out in our next session. So other information that might be on that IEP is physical education, what type yours will receive, if it's adaptive, which that is something that you can request and decide and brainstorm out in that IEP meeting. And again, if your child is seeing a private OT or a private physical therapist and they have ideas about, accommodations or specializing the physical education, do not be afraid to include their recommendations. They are a professional that is already working with your child and well aware of their needs. So, information on parent participation will be on the IEP, how they have been contacting you, how they've been giving you prior written notice, the child or the parent's language, health and medical information, and diploma option. So what the pathway that your child is using to work towards their standard diploma. And of course, that'll only be for our older transition age students. Which, speaking of transitional IEPs, so I.D.E.A says that transition has to start occurring at the age of 16, so that it gives students anywhere from 2 to 5 years, depending on whether they defer their graduation at 18, time to work towards specific vocational skills as well as their core academic skills. However, so remember when we said nothing could supersede the I.D.E.A, the state of Florida has actually gone a little progressive with this. And it used to be that we started transition services looking at that at 14, and now we are doing it at age 12. So this is not a violation of the I.D.E.A. It's actually more proactive than the I.D.E.A because it gives us more time to identify that child's needs and to look at it from the lens of not just their functionality and their academics, but also what life is going to look like after, and making goals specifically towards that as well. So this is one of our examples of our one-pagers. You can find them on fndusa.org. They are amazing. We break down big ideas in the I.D.E.A, and we know you're not lawyers, doctors, or special educators. So we want you to understand this stuff. So we have so many of these one-pagers on every ESE topic you could possibly think of. And this is a really great one that's talking about members of the IEP team. And so we get a lot of questions about that sometimes from parents, not knowing who's supposed to be there. This is a wonderful one-pager to illustrate to you that, again, I.D.E.A says specifically who should be there every time. So if you need information, check us out, fndusa.org. There is no evaluation. I am with Poppin, Parents Offering Parents Information, and we are the North Panhandle part of the Family Network on Disabilities. We also have the Parent Support Network and the Parent Education Network, and our sister program, the Family Star. No matter where you live, you are covered. You can reach us on Facebook, Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, and again, that amazing website, fndusa.org. You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5736, or you can scan my purple QR code, and that would get you in direct contact with me. So a parent trainer like myself, or possibly even myself, is only a call or a couple of website clicks away. You are never alone. So thank you so much for your time, and I hope that you keep following us for our next installment, which will be the least restrictive environment. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good one.